A rooster's cry shatters the pre-dawn stillness. This is the wake-up call for one of the medieval world's most vital and weary workers, the baker. We are stepping back through time to follow a single exhausting day in their flour-dusted shoes. You will witness the harsh realities and hidden dramas behind every loaf of bread. Discover how a simple ingredient like flour was guarded like treasure, and why selling 13 loaves could save a baker from ruin. Have you ever wondered what daily life demanded of the hands that fed an entire town? The darkness is absolute, and the cold bites deep into the stone walls of the small room above the bakery. There is no gentle waking, only the jarring transition from exhausted sleep to shivering consciousness. His bed is a simple straw-filled mattress on a wooden frame, offering little comfort against the persistent chill that seeps in from the world outside. There is no time to linger. The first and most critical task of the day awaits, one that cannot be delayed. He pulls on his simple, flour-encrusted tunic and moves stiffly down the narrow stairs into the main workshop. Here, the air is even colder, still holding the ghost of yesterday's heat. The great hearth is a dark, yawning mouth, filled with the ashes of last night's final firing. His muscles ache in protest as he kneels, clearing the old ash and carefully building a new nest of tinder and kindling. The strike of flint on steel is a sharp, lonely sound in the pre-dawn silence, followed by the first hopeful curl of smoke. He coaxes the tiny ember into a flame, then a fire, feeding it slowly with larger pieces of wood. This is not just about warmth, it is about survival. The entire day, his livelihood, the bread that will feed his family and his community, all depend on this single, fragile fire reaching the perfect, roaring temperature. Can you feel the weight of that responsibility, the sheer physical demand of starting every single day from absolute zero, long before the rest of the world has even begun to stir? The fire is only the beginning. A baker does not bake over an open flame. His true instrument is the massive, brick-lined beehive oven that dominates the workshop. Now comes the most dangerous and delicate operation of the morning, one that defines his entire craft. He must transform that small, controlled fire into an inferno contained within the oven's chamber. For hours, he feeds the beast, stacking split logs with a practiced rhythm, his face flushed from the blistering heat that radiates from the open archway. The roar of the flames inside is deafening, a contained storm of heat that blackens the soot-streaked bricks. He judges the temperature not with any instrument, but with his entire being. He feels the heat on his skin, observes the color of the glowing bricks, and reads the shimmer of the air inside. This knowledge is not written down. It is earned through years of burned fingers and undercooked loaves, a language of fire and stone passed from master to apprentice. One mistake, one moment of misjudgment, and a week's worth of precious grain could be rendered into inedible charcoal. When the dome glows a consistent deep orange, he knows the time has come. With long, heavy iron rakes, he begins the frantic, smoky work of dragging the mountain of smoldering embers and white-hot ashes out of the oven and into a waiting metal bin. The workshop fills with a choking, acrid haze. In mere minutes, the oven must be perfectly clean, its stone floor swept spotless, ready to receive the first batch of dough. The entire chamber now holds a trapped, baking heat, a captured sun ready to work its magic. How do you master something you cannot even touch, something you can only feel and witness from a safe distance? This was the baker's first and most vital test, repeated every single day of his life. With the oven now a banked and breathing heart of heat, A different urgency takes over. The baker cannot simply bake. He must first create, and for that he needs water. This is not a matter of turning a tap. Water is a heavy, cumbersome treasure, and securing it is a daily battle of muscle and logistics. Imagine hauling gallons upon gallons of water, not in lightweight plastic, but in sloshing, back-straining wooden buckets. The nearest source might be a deep community well with a cranky, rusted pulley system, a public fountain where queues form before dawn, or a stream a muddy 5-minute walk away. Every drop used in the bakery, from the water that brings the dense dough to life to the scalding water needed to scrub the massive mixing troughs, must be carried, bucket by agonizing bucket. His arms and shoulders, already sore from wrestling with firewood, now scream under this new liquid weight. A single batch of dough could require dozens of liters, and the cleaning afterward demands even more. There is no room for compromise on cleanliness either. Contaminated water means spoiled flour, failed fermentation, and loaves that could make people sick. So he makes trip after trip, his boots scraping on the cobblestones, the weight of the full buckets bending his posture. The simple, elemental act of gathering water becomes a central pillar of his exhaustion. How many steps, how many aching journeys, were hidden within the price of a single loaf of bread. The precious grain arrives not as fine flour, but as coarse, heavy sacks of whole kernels. Before a single drop of water touches it, the baker's work begins with his hands and his nose. A careful inspection under the weak morning light filtering into the workshop. He plunges his hand deep into a sack, letting the hard, dry grains run through his fingers. He is searching for more than just texture. He is hunting for hidden threats. A faint, musty odor could mean rot or mold, a death sentence for an entire batch of dough. He sifts carefully, his eyes sharp for the telltale signs of weevils or other grain beetles, tiny invaders that can hollow out a kernel from the inside, leaving behind nothing but dust and husks. An infested sack is a catastrophe, a direct blow to his pocket, and a risk to his reputation. The types of grain tell their own story of status and survival. Pure, fine white wheat flour is a luxury, often reserved for the Lord's table or the wealthiest merchants. For the common people, and thus for most bakers, the daily bread is a much heartier, darker affair. It might be made from rye, which grows well in poorer soils, producing a dense, slightly sour loaf. Or it could be barley, creating a crumbly, flat bread that fills the belly but lacks the rise of wheat. Most common of all is maslin, a practical mixture of wheat and rye sown and harvested together, a humble grain that reflects the medieval reality of making do with what the land provides. This daily inspection is also a silent testament to his relationship with the miller, the man who grinds his grain. A dishonest miller might mix in cheaper grains or even add sand to increase the weight, a fraudulent practice that could ruin a baker's bread and his good name. A good miller, one who provides a consistent, clean grind, is a partner as vital as the fire itself. The entire community's health and the baker's very livelihood rests on the integrity of this single raw material. Can you taste the difference between a loaf born from clean, healthy grain and one tainted by neglect? A difference felt not just on the tongue, but in the security of a household. But the true magic of the bread, the very soul that gives it life and lift, is still to come. Locked away in a special clay pot or a wooden crock is the baker's most precious and mysterious possession, his barm. This is not an ingredient you can simply buy. It is a living, breathing culture, a sourdough starter that is the sole source of leavening in his world. This bubbling, tangy-smelling paste is a wild fermentation of nothing more than flour and water, teeming with natural yeasts and bacteria captured from the very air of the bakery itself. It is a living heirloom, often passed down from a master baker, or carefully maintained and fed for decades. Its unique flavor profile, its very personality, is a signature as distinct as the baker's own name. Losing it is not an option. If the barm dies from neglect, becomes contaminated, or is accidentally used up, the consequences are catastrophic. Without it, there is no rise. The dough will remain a dense, heavy slab, producing loaves that are hard as stone and difficult to digest. It would be a commercial and social ruin, shutting down the bakery for days or even weeks until a new, stable culture could be painstakingly developed or begged from a rival. This tiny, unassuming crock holds the power to sustain a family or plunge them into destitution. Can you comprehend the constant, low-grade anxiety of tending to something so fragile yet so utterly essential, knowing that your entire world could literally fall flat with one moment of carelessness? With the living barm added to the flour and water, the true physical trial begins. The baker heaves the shaggy, sticky mass from the mixing bowl into a massive wooden trough, a container so large it resembles a child's coffin. This is where dough is born, not through gentle stirring, but through a brutal, full-body assault. Kneading is not a delicate kitchen task. It is a test of endurance, a relentless push, fold, and turn that engages every muscle from the shoulders to the lower back. The dough is stubborn and dense, thick with heavy bran and resistant gluten, and it fights back against his efforts. He leans his entire weight into the heels of his hands, driving down and forward, the wooden trough creaking in protest with every thrust. The air fills with the rhythmic slap of wet dough and the grunts of his exertion. This is not work measured in minutes, but in hours. A single batch could demand this punishing routine for the length of time it takes to walk a mile, and there are multiple batches to prepare. It is little wonder that this crushing labor was so often delegated to the youngest, strongest apprentice, a baptism by fire and flour that would leave his arms trembling and his back a single, solid ache by day's end. Can you feel the vibration of that impact traveling up your own arms? The slow, grinding fatigue that settles deep into the joints after just a few minutes of such effort, let alone a lifetime. This daily marathon of kneading sculpted the baker's body as much as it did his bread, leaving him with the powerful, stooped shoulders and battered hands of a manual laborer. The perfect loaf required not just skill, but a kind of sacrificial strength, a piece of the baker's own physical well-being baked into every single bite. The final, pummeled dough rests in the trough, a living, breathing mass that has doubled in size, its surface taut and alive with the promise of bread. Now comes the transformation from a single entity into dozens of individual loaves, each destined for a different table and purpose. With a practiced hand, the baker wields a heavy, curved blade, slicing the dough into precise, weighted portions. This is not guesswork. Each piece must meet a strict standard, for selling underweight bread is a crime that carries severe fines, public shame, or worse. His hands, though strong and calloused, move with a surprising delicacy as he begins to shape the portions. For the common customer, he forms simple, round boules, tucking the edges under to create a smooth, tight skin that will help the loaf hold its shape in the blistering heat of the oven. But not all bread is created equal. A wealthy patron or the local monastery might request a more elaborate form, perhaps a long, tapered batard or an intricately braided loaf for a feast day. Each shape requires a different technique, a subtle dance of folding and tension that the baker performs without a single conscious thought. The final and perhaps most dramatic tool in this process is the baker's peel. This long, flat wooden shovel, with its handle stretching several feet, is his only bridge to the oven's fiery heart. He dusts the peel with a generous layer of coarse bran or flour to prevent sticking, then expertly slides it under a shaped loaf. With a smooth, confident thrust, he sends the raw dough sailing through the air, landing it with a soft thud on the hot stone floor deep inside the oven. It is an act of pure faith and muscle memory, placing his hours of labor directly onto a surface hot enough to scorch it in seconds. One misjudged angle, one moment of hesitation, and the loaf could fold upon itself or miss its mark entirely, becoming a ruined, misshapen mess. Can you sense the precision required in that single, fluid motion, the culmination of a lifetime of practice, where the baker literally launches his livelihood into the fire? The first rays of sunlight do not find the baker alone with his fire. As the golden light spills across the cobblestones, his workshop door becomes a portal to the waking world. The air, once thick with the smell of smoke and yeast, now fills with the murmur of voices. The first arrivals are the servants from the grand houses, their clothes a little cleaner, their postures a little straighter. They do not come for the common loaves, but for the finer, whiter breads, placing their master's orders with a quiet authority that the baker notes with a respectful nod. Behind them, the neighbors begin to trickle in, their own baskets in hand. The bakery is more than a shop. It is the town's morning newspaper, its courthouse of public opinion, and its social club, all rolled into one. Here, a blacksmith's wife shares the latest news of a traveling merchant's arrival, while two old men debate the quality of the recent harvest, their words punctuated by the rhythmic thump of dough from the back of the shop. The baker moves between his oven and the counter, his ears catching every fragment of conversation. He hears who is ill, who is feuding, and which families are preparing for a wedding. This constant flow of information is as vital to his business as the grain itself, for knowing the town's rhythms allows him to anticipate demand, to bake a few extra loaves for a feast day, or to hold back if a sickness is spreading. His hands are covered in flour, but his mind is mapping the intricate social network of the entire community. Can you hear the hum of that human hive, the way a simple transaction for bread wove every individual into a shared daily ritual, binding the entire town together with the simple, universal language of food? The finest, widest loaf of the day is always the first to feel the oven's heat. This is not the coarse, dark bread for the common folk, but a special order for the local lord's table, baked from flour that has been painstakingly sifted multiple times to remove every last speck of bran. The resulting dough is pale, soft, and almost delicate in comparison to the hearty masculine mixtures that will follow. The baker handles this batch with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics, his movements slow and deliberate. There is no room for error here. A single dark scorch mark, an uneven rise, or a flavor deemed lacking could mean more than a lost customer. It could mean a fine, the loss of a crucial patronage, or even a public reprimand from the Lord's stern steward. His reputation, and the very security of his bakery, hinges on the perfection of these first few loaves. As he slides the pale forms into the oven on his wooden peel, he watches them like a hawk, judging the exact moment their crusts turn a perfect golden brown. The air fills with a rich, nutty aroma entirely different from the sour, earthy scent of the common breads. This is the smell of privilege, of status baked directly into the crumb. Can you sense the immense pressure in that single batch? The knowledge that the most powerful man in the district will be breaking this very bread with his own hands at his midday meal. The baker's entire morning has been a carefully orchestrated performance leading to this moment, and the curtain rises on a stage of blistering heat and absolute consequence. That perfect loaf for the Lord's table carries a price tag set not by the baker, but by the law. Every single loaf he produces, from the finest white bread to the coarsest brown, exists under the watchful eye of a rigid medieval price control system known as the assize of bread and ale. This was not a suggestion. It was a legally enforced decree that dictated the exact weight, quality, and most importantly, the price of his bread based on the current market price of grain. The system was designed to protect the poor from starvation and profiteering during times of scarcity. But for the baker, it was a source of constant, grinding anxiety. Imagine having no control over what you charge for the product of your own exhausting labor. If the price of wheat soared after a bad harvest, the assize tables demanded that the baker sell his loaves at the same fixed price. But to make it financially viable, he was forced to make each loaf dramatically smaller. He was caught in an impossible bind selling bread that felt like a betrayal to his hungry, regular customers who saw their daily loaf shrinking in their hands before their eyes. The true enforcer of this system was a figure who could make any baker's blood run cold, the town's official bread weigher. This man, appointed by the local authorities, would make unannounced visits to the shop, his cold, official gaze sweeping over the day's batches. He carried a set of precise scales and a heavy ledger, and his job was to test the weight of random loaves against the legal standard. Finding an underweight loaf was not just a simple mistake, it was a prosecutable offense. The consequences were swift and severe, ranging from heavy fines that could cripple a small business to the dreaded punishment of the pillory. Can you feel the tension in the air every time a stranger entered the shop, the baker's eyes darting nervously to his scales, hoping against hope that his measurements were perfect? This constant cat-and-mouse game with authority shaped the very rhythm of his work, a daily reminder that his survival depended not just on his skill with fire and flour, but on his ability to navigate a web of suffocating regulations. With the Lord's delicate white loaves safely cooling, the bakery's focus shifts to its true lifeblood, the dense, dark bread that will fill the stomachs of the town's workers and peasants. The dough for this second bake is a completely different creature, a heavier, stickier mass made from rye or barley. These grains are cheaper and hardier than wheat, growing in soils where the more delicate crop would fail, but they produce a loaf that is a world away from the airy, white bread of the nobility. As the baker plunges his hands back in the trough, he feels the gritty texture of the coarse flour, flecked with dark bran that was never sifted out. This is not a flaw. It is the very essence of the common loaf, packed with roughage that makes it incredibly filling, a necessity for laborers facing a long day of backbreaking work in the fields or on the construction sites. The fermentation is different too, often producing a distinct, sour tang that would be considered undesirable in the fine manor house, but is a familiar, comforting note to the people who rely on it. Sometimes, a careful bite would reveal an unwelcome surprise. A tiny, hard piece of grit from the millstone itself. A small, stony reminder of the imperfect process that turned grain into flour. This was the daily bread of an entire class of people, a tangible representation of their place in the world, hearty and sustaining, yet rough and unrefined. Can you taste the difference between a life of privilege and a life of toil? a difference baked directly into the crust and crumb of every single loaf. That dense, dark loaf of common bread hides a clever secret within its very count. The term baker's dozen, meaning 13 instead of 12, is not just a quaint saying. It was a brilliant, practical solution to a terrifying professional hazard. The medieval baker lived under the constant threat of the bread assize and its brutal enforcer, the bread weigher. His scales were the law, and an underweight loaf was a crime. But how could any baker, working with inconsistent flour, variable water, and a wild, living barm, guarantee that every one of the dozens of loaves he baked each day would meet the exact weight standard? The answer was, he simply could not. The risk of a costly mistake was ever present. So, bakers developed a simple and ingenious form of insurance. When a customer ordered a dozen loaves, the baker would add a 13th for free. This extra loaf was not an act of generosity, but a calculated piece of risk management. Its weight served as a buffer, absorbing the natural variations in the batch and ensuring that the total weight of the 12 loaves the customer paid for would almost certainly meet or exceed the legal requirement. It was a small, self-imposed loss to protect against a catastrophic one. Can you see the grim pragmatism in that extra piece of bread? A tiny shield against the pillory and financial ruin. This was the baker's silent pact with an unforgiving system, a daily sacrifice baked right into the mathematics of survival. The last loaf of the common batch is pulled from the oven, its dark crust steaming as it joins the long rows cooling on the heavy wooden shelves. For the first time since the rooster's cry, a fragile silence descends upon the bakery. The frantic energy of the morning evaporates, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and the lingering, comforting warmth of the great oven. This is the midday lull, a stolen hour of rest that feels as essential as the air itself. The baker's family emerges from the corners of the household, his wife wiping her hands on her apron, his children appearing from their chores, all drawn by the promise of a brief, shared reprieve. There is no grand feast laid out. Their meal is a humble reflection of their station, a thick, simmering pottage served in wooden bowls. This stew has been bubbling over a smaller fire since dawn, a practical mixture of whatever vegetables are in season, perhaps some dried peas or beans, and if they are fortunate, a scrap of salted meat or bacon for flavor. It is thickened with chunks of yesterday's bread, now softened and absorbing the rich broth, ensuring that nothing goes to waste. They wash it down with small cups of weak, home-brewed ale, a safer alternative to questionable water, its slight bitterness cutting through the stew's hearty richness. There is no leisurely conversation, no lingering over the food. This meal is functional, a refueling of the body as necessary as banking the coals in the oven. The baker eats quickly, his mind already ticking forward to the afternoon's duties, the cleaning, the preparation for the next day's bake, the final sales. His rest is measured not in minutes of peace, but in the number of bites he can take before the demands of the day summon him back to his flour-dusted world. How many such hurried meals, how many moments of quiet connection, were swallowed whole by the relentless rhythm of the oven's cooling heat. Yet every hand in the bakery was not equal. While the master baker directed the symphony of fire and flour, its most brutal notes were played by a single, weary figure, the apprentice. This boy, often no more than 12 or 13 years old, was the human engine that kept the entire operation from grinding to a halt. His day began even earlier, roused from a thin sleep on a straw pallet in the coldest corner of the workshop to face a mountain of thankless tasks. His world was one of ash and ache. He was the first to attack the cold, dead hearth, scooping out the gritty gray ashes from the previous night and getting them in his hair, his eyes, and his lungs. He was the one sent on the endless, sloshing journeys to the well, his thin shoulders straining under the weight of buckets that seemed as large as he was. After the mixing, he faced the monumental job of scrubbing the massive, crusted dough troughs, scraping off the cement-like residue of flour, and water with sand and scalding water until his hands were raw and red. Can you see this boy, not as a student of a noble craft, but as a miniature laborer, drowning in the sheer physicality of his position? His education was not one of gentle instruction, but of harsh correction. A misplaced bucket, a poorly swept floor, or a moment of hesitation could earn him a sharp cuff on the ear or a torrent of shouted frustration from the master, for whom time was money and mistakes were a luxury no one could afford. This grueling existence was endured for a single, distant dream, the faint hope that after 7 long years of this servitude, he might finally earn the title of journeyman, and one day, if the stars aligned and he saved every penny, perhaps even own a shop of his own. His present was a landscape of blisters and fatigue, all for a future that was nothing more than a fragile promise. But the baker's craft extended far beyond the simple, sustaining loaf. For the wealthy and for special occasions, his workshop transformed into a place of edible artistry, a realm of sugar, spice, and intricate decoration. These were not daily staples, but celebratory luxuries, and their creation demanded a completely different set of skills and ingredients. A local merchant's wife might commission a spiced meat pie for a family gathering, its thick, sturdy crust acting as both an oven and a serving dish, locking in the flavors of expensive pepper, cinnamon, and cloves seasoning the precious meat within. For a summer festival, the order could be for a tray of delicate fruit tarts, the sweet, seasonal berries glistening under a fragile, sugar-dusted pastry that required a much lighter touch than the hefty bread dough. But the pinnacle of this specialized work was often the magnificent simnel cake, a rich, spiced fruitcake associated with Mothering Sunday. This was no ordinary bake. Its dense batter was heavy with dried fruits like currants and raisins, luxuries imported from distant lands, and perfumed with costly saffron and nutmeg. The true mark of the simnel cake, however, was its decoration. The baker would carefully divide the marzipan, a sweet paste of ground almonds and sugar, into 11 neat balls. These were not mere garnish. They represented the 11 faithful apostles of Jesus, arranged in a solemn circle atop the cake. The entire creation was then gently browned under a hot iron or in the fading heat of the bread oven, the marzipan taking on a beautiful, toasted glow. Can you picture the contrast between this single, ornate centerpiece and the hundreds of simple, dark loaves that were his daily grind? This was where the baker transcended his role as a mere producer of food and became a creator of symbols and celebration, his hands shaping not just sustenance, but joy and devotion for those who could afford such fleeting beauty. A single misjudgment could erase an entire morning's labor. The line between a perfectly baked loaf and a charred, smoking ruin was terrifyingly thin, a reality the baker faced with every batch he slid into the oven. An oven loaded with too much residual heat from the morning's fire would turn his precious dough into lumps of bitter charcoal in minutes, filling the workshop with an acrid stench that signaled financial disaster. There were no second chances, no way to salvage a burnt batch. That blackened bread represented not just wasted hours of strenuous work, but the literal burning of his investment in flour, water, and firewood. Sometimes the failure was quieter, but just as devastating. If his precious barm, that living sourdough starter, lost its vitality from a sudden chill or simple neglect. The dough would simply refuse to rise. The result was not bread, but a dense, heavy slab the consistency of clay, a substance his customers derisively called a doorstop or a trencher, only fit to be used as an edible plate for stew. Can you feel the sinking dread of pulling a batch of these flat, sad discs from the oven, knowing they were unsellable? In a trade governed by razor-thin margins, a single major failure like this could mean his family would go hungry that week, the lost income rippling through their lives like a crack through dry ground. His entire existence was a high-wire act performed daily over an open flame, with no safety net to catch him if he fell. The midday meal is a brief truce with exhaustion, but the oven's fading warmth offers no real reprieve. Its heat, still radiating from the thick brick dome, is a resource far too precious to waste. While the morning's frantic labors supplied the town's immediate hunger, the afternoon presents a different, more calculated challenge. Bread is a fleeting thing, at its best for barely a day before it begins to harden and stale. To close his shop tomorrow, even for a few hours, would be unthinkable. So the baker must use the oven's lingering energy to bake for a future his customers have not yet even begun to face. This second bake is a quieter, more methodical affair, focused not on freshness, but on survival. The dough he mixes now is not the soft, risen boule of the morning. It is a much stiffer, leaner mixture, often with more salt, designed to last for days, weeks, or in some cases, even longer. He shapes it into thinner, flatter discs, sometimes pricking the tops with a knife to keep them from puffing up, creating a denser, drier product. For the local sailors preparing for a voyage, or for families wanting a cheap, durable staple to see them through the week, he might make hardtack. This is bread stripped to its barest essence, baked and then baked again until every last drop of moisture is driven out, leaving behind a rock-hard biscuit that could literally last for years if kept dry. Can you imagine breaking a tooth on a piece of bread, or needing to dunk it in stew or ale just to make it edible? This was not food for pleasure, but for pure, practical endurance, a testament to a world where scarcity was always waiting just beyond the next sunset. The final loaf may be sold, but the baker's work is far from over. His world is now a landscape of white dust and clinging dough. The cleanup is a monumental task, a battle against the very substance of his trade that must be won before exhaustion claims him. Every surface in the workshop, from the rough-hewn countertops to the deep grooves in the floorboards, is blanketed in a fine, stubborn layer of flour. It hangs in the air like a ghost, settling in his hair, lining his lungs, and coating every tool and shelf. Sweeping is the first futile skirmish. He uses a stiff, bristled broom, pushing great clouds of the powder toward the door, but the dust is relentless, drifting back to coat the freshly cleared stone almost immediately. Next comes the war against the residue. The massive wooden mixing trough, scarred and stained from years of use, is caked with a cement-like crust of dried dough. There are no powerful chemical sprays or gentle sponges to aid him. His weapons are simple and brutal. He scrapes with a flat piece of wood or iron, peeling away the toughest layers, then attacks the remainder with handfuls of coarse sand and scalding water, scrubbing until the wood is raw and his forearms burn with the effort. His precious baking peel, the long wooden shovel, must be meticulously cleaned of any stuck-on dough, lest it tear the delicate skin of tomorrow's loaves. Even the heavy iron tools used to manage the fire require scouring to remove ash and rust. This is not a quick wipe down. It is a deep, physical purge of the entire space, a ritual of restoration that leaves him just as weary as the baking itself. Can you feel the gritty texture of that sand on your own hands? The sting of hot water on raw skin? The sheer, grinding tedium of making a messy world clean again with nothing but muscle and determination? This endless battle against flour and filth was the baker's uncelebrated second shift, a duty that ensured his workshop would be reborn, pristine and ready, with the next morning's first spark. The cooling loaves represent more than just food. They are a form of currency in a world where actual coins are scarce and precious. As the last customer of the day lingers, the transaction that follows is rarely a simple exchange of bread for money. The baker reaches for his tally stick, a simple, split piece of wood that serves as his ledger and his memory. One half stays with him, the other goes to the customer. For every loaf taken on credit, he scores a notch across both sticks, a physical record of debt carved into the grain. This system of trust and wood is the backbone of his business, but it opens a door to a complex barter economy. A farmer's wife might not have a single penny to her name, but she arrives with a basket of fresh eggs from her chickens. The blacksmith, his own hands blackened from the forge, offers to sharpen the bakery's heavy iron tools in exchange for his family's weekly bread. The town carpenter pledges to repair a broken shelf, his labor directly converted into loaves. Each of these trades requires a rapid, mental calculation of value. How many eggs equal one large Maslin loaf? Is a morning of the carpenter's skilled work worth 3 days of bread for his family? The baker must be a shrewd economist, constantly assessing the worth of goods and services in a marketplace with no fixed prices. He cannot afford to be cheated, for a bad trade means his own family loses the real value of the flour and firewood he has consumed. Can you feel the weight of that constant negotiation? The mental energy required to ensure that a basket of apples truly settles a debt for 5 loaves. This intricate dance of favors and goods wove the baker directly into the town's economic fabric, making him less a shopkeeper and more a central node in a vast, unspoken web of mutual survival. Every transaction, every bartered egg and notched tally stick was built upon a foundation more fragile than any loaf of dough. That foundation was the bakery itself, a structure of timber and thatch that lived in a state of permanent, terrifying proximity to its own destruction. The single greatest danger hanging over the medieval baker was not a bad harvest or a dishonest miller, but the very element that gave him life, fire. His workshop was a tinderbox, its walls and beams dried to a crisp by decades of radiant heat, its roof a thick layer of straw or reeds waiting for a single stray spark to grant it a terrible new purpose. The oven was a contained star, its surface often hot enough to scorch wood that brushed against it. A gust of wind through an open door could carry a single, glowing ember from the fire raking process up into the eaves, where it would smolder unseen until the entire roof was suddenly ablaze. There were no fire departments, no alarms, only the desperate, shouting chain of neighbors passing buckets from the nearest well, a hopelessly inadequate defense against a roaring inferno. The consequences of such a fire were absolute. It meant the utter annihilation of his livelihood, the loss of his home, his tools, and his entire stock of precious grain. It meant destitution for his family and a debt he could never hope to repay. The fear of that crackling roar was a silent partner in every bake, a cold dread that lived alongside the oven's blistering heat. How do you sleep at night, knowing that the heart of your home is a force that could, in a single careless moment, consume everything you have ever built? The fire that began the day must now be carefully put to bed. As the last of the daylight fades, The baker's final ritual is to bank the oven's great heart. He does not extinguish it completely, for rekindling a fire from nothing in the bitter dark of tomorrow's pre-dawn is a task too cruel to contemplate. Instead, he uses a long-handled shovel to gather the remaining embers, the hottest, most enduring cores of the day's blaze, and pushes them into a thick, insulating mound at the very back of the oven. He covers this glowing nest with a deep layer of fine white ash, a blanket that will starve the flames of air while preserving their latent heat for hours. This is an act of faith in the future, a quiet promise to his mourning self that a spark of today's labor will survive the long, cold night. Can you feel the careful reverence in this motion, the nurturing of a slumbering giant that holds the key to another day's survival? With the fire secured, his attention turns to the world outside. The open shopfront, so welcoming to the morning's crowds, is now a vulnerable mouth. He heaves the heavy wooden shutters closed, their familiar groan echoing in the quiet street, and drops a thick iron bar into place with a solid, final clang. This is not just about locking out the night. It is about protecting his treasure. Inside, every tool has its designated place. The heavy iron peel is hung high on the wall, safe from dampness and far from prying eyes. The remaining sacks of grain are dragged into a locked storeroom, safe from the ever-present threat of rats and mice whose tiny teeth could gnaw through a week's profits. Even the precious clay crock of barm, the living soul of his bread, is moved to a cool, dark corner, shielded from any sudden draft or curious pest. Every action is a defense, a systematic battening down of hatches against the countless small threats that the darkness brings. His workshop, once a bustling hub of community, now becomes a fortress, its silence a testament to the constant, wearying vigilance required to simply stand still in a precarious world. The final clang of the iron bar on the door does not signal a true escape from the bakery. For the baker, the workday bleeds seamlessly into the rhythms of his family's life, all unfolding within the warm, flower-scented walls of the very same building. His home is not a separate place of peace. It is the upper floor of the workshop, a series of small rooms perched directly above the source of their livelihood. The pervasive heat from the great oven below becomes a constant, unwelcome guest, seeping up through the floorboards all through the night. In the bitter cold of winter, this lingering warmth might be a small mercy, but during the suffocating heat of a summer evening, it transforms their sleeping quarters into an airless prison, forcing the family to seek refuge by an open window, gasping for a breeze that never seems to come. The air they breathe is forever seasoned with the ghosts of 1,000 bakes. The comforting aroma of fresh bread that greets a customer in the morning is, for his children, the very scent of their childhood, a fragrance that clings to their hair, their clothes, and their simple woolen blankets. It is a smell so deeply woven into their existence they likely no longer even notice it, the way a fish does not notice the water. Can you comprehend a life so completely intertwined with your trade that its very essence becomes the air in your lungs and the warmth of your bed? Their home was not a sanctuary from labor, but its constant fragrant echo. Their meals, too, were dictated by the bakery's surplus and its failures. While the finest white loaves were sold to the manor and the sturdy Maslin loaves to their neighbors, the family's own table was often set with the bakery's cast-offs. They ate the end pieces of loaves that were too misshapen to sell, the occasional loaf that had risen a little unevenly, or the bread that had begun to stale after a single day. Nothing was wasted. Yesterday's bread, hard and tough, would be cubed into the family's evening pottage, thickening the broth and stretching a single pot of stew to feed many mouths. Even the coarse bran sifted from the Lord's fine flour might find its way into their own, much denser household loaf. The children grew up understanding that the best of their father's craft was not for them. It was a necessary sacrifice, a quiet understanding that their own comfort was secondary to the economic survival of the household. Their home was a kingdom of bread, yet they themselves often feasted on its humblest, hardest borders. A single, guttering candle now holds back the darkness of the workshop. The day's heat has faded from the great oven, leaving only a deep, residual warmth in the bricks and a profound stillness in the air. The baker sits on a low stool, a torn grain sack spread across his lap. His needle, clumsy in his thick, calloused fingers, pushes through the coarse fabric in a slow, deliberate rhythm. This is the only time his hands are still, and in this rare quiet, his mind begins to wander through the echoes of the day. He thinks of the Lord's steward who gave a curt, satisfied nod at the perfect pale loaves, a gesture that meant security for another week. He recalls the grateful smile of the young mother who paid with a basket of fresh eggs, her relief at feeding her children as tangible as the coins he did not receive. He even allows himself a small, private smile at the memory of the two old men arguing over the quality of the barley harvest. Their lively debate, a testament to the bakery's role as the town's heart. These small, human moments are the true ledger of his life, more meaningful than the notches on his tally stick. The ache in his back and the raw skin on his hands are the price paid for this quiet sense of purpose. In a world of fleeting fortunes and constant hardship, his craft offers a rare and solid certainty. Every single day, without fail, his labor transforms simple grain into the very substance that holds his community together. Can any other trade claim such a fundamental daily impact? The needle pulls through the last stitch, and he ties off the thread. Tomorrow, before the rooster crows, the great cycle will begin again. But for now, in the fragile circle of candlelight, there is only the deep, earned satisfaction of a day that truly meant something. That single, guttering candle finally surrenders to the night, and with it, the baker's long day is officially done. We have walked every aching step in his flour-dusted shoes, from the shivering pre-dawn fire to the final, weary stitch on a torn sack. His existence was a relentless cycle of fire, flour, and fatigue, a daily marathon where his body was the primary tool and his greatest liability. He was more than just a craftsman. He was the linchpin of his entire community, a quiet hero whose labor literally built the bodies that built the medieval world. The next time you casually pick up a fresh loaf of bread, consider the immense human history baked into its crust. Think of the pre-dawn darkness, the searing heat of a brick oven, the back-straining haul of water, and the constant, gnawing fear of fire and failure. That simple, delicious staple on your table represents centuries of this grueling, uncelebrated toil. So we have to ask, as you reflect on this day in a life so different from our own, what role do you think you would have played in this intricate medieval world? Would you have been the baker, the miller, the blacksmith, or perhaps the farmer who grew the grain? Share your thoughts and join the conversation in the comments below.